Topic for today, we're going to talk about stress, a little bit about how you might manage it, because of course you're all HSC students, so we know that there's a good chance you're feeling a little bit of pressure at this time in the year. Now, some of the stuff we're going to talk about has come from a program that I developed for helping students to manage stress in the HSC called Study Without Stress. And basically they are just really simple techniques to try and manage stress. Some of them will be familiar to you, some of them I think might be new. So look, what I've done today is all the slides that I'm talking from, you're going to get a copy of those, and they are fairly text heavy, but I've done that deliberately. I've done that so that you can actually spend more time listening and thinking, and you don't have to spend so much time taking notes, because hopefully all the major points are already there for you, okay? I also have my email address at the end, and if you have any questions, just send me an email. All right, so let's go on. So there's actually been a couple of studies looking at the stress levels of Australian HSC students, not many, just a handful of studies. And what this Australian research actually tells us is, not surprisingly, that as you go through year 11 and 12, your anxiety and stress levels increase with reaching, I guess, a peak in the HSC exam period. Not really rocket science, but it is good as a scientist to always check that you know the facts and you understand things correctly by measuring them. Now, what this research has also shown us, though, more interestingly, is that about 40% of students will report having that anxiety, depression, stress levels in a moderate or above range, which actually means that 60% of students are actually feeling normal to mild levels of stress, which is actually fine. And in fact, it's only really the top 10 or 15% of students that would be experiencing stress levels that would be at a level where we need to be worried about it. So I guess part of what I'm going to try and talk to you about today is that, okay, you feel stressed, and it's actually okay to feel stressed during this period. There are some things you can do to reduce your stress, but overall, part of this is about learning how to just ride with those levels of stress. We certainly know that those people who are likely to have experienced stress in earlier years, so in year 7, year 8, year 9, year 10, are most likely to be the students who experience those more severe levels of stress going through. Now, there's also been a little bit of research done about sleep in HSC students, and again, perhaps not surprising to you who are going through it, what the research has found is that HSC students tend to sleep for less during the HSC period. They tend to spend lots of their weekend oversleeping to make up for sleep, and they also do quite a bit of napping. Now, the problem here is actually just mainly around students who don't get enough sleep. It's actually okay to do some oversleeping, and it's actually okay to do some napping. And in fact, it's better to do the napping to make up for lost sleep. But ideally, what you should be aiming for is trying to get regular, full amounts of sleep in one hit. So you don't need to use napping, you don't need to use oversleeping, but it's actually really critical that you do get enough sleep, because we know that if you don't have enough sleep, it's going to impact on your concentration, your attention levels, your academic performance. And in fact, being sleep deprived actually causes feelings of anxiety and depression, well known. So by sleeping, you actually might reduce some of the stress feelings that you're having anyway. Okay, so moving on, why is the HSC so stressful? Again, I think this is a fairly obvious point, but I think there's many factors here. I mean, yes, there's more workloads and there are a lot more deadlines, and I guess those deadlines are critical deadlines. You don't get stuff in, you start to lose marks, and the loss of those marks impacts on your overall score. Certainly we know that the difficulty of the work that you're given is also increasing in year 11 and 12, so you're starting to be quite challenged intellectually if you haven't already. We know that there are very high expectations that are put on students by their parents, by their teachers, by their schools, and also by students themselves. And we also know that there are lots of really unhelpful beliefs that students have about what the HSC means. Like, that if you don't get a good HSC mark, then it's the end of your life. If you don't get a good HSC mark, you won't get into university and you'll never get a good job. Those sorts of beliefs can actually be really helpful and put extra and unnecessary pressure on yourself to perform. We also know that, you know, when you're an HSC student, you're also, you know, a young person who has other things going on in their life: boyfriends, girlfriends, paid employment, extracurricular activities, sport, family commitments. And so suddenly having to juggle all of those things together increases the amount of stress that you experience during this time. But I think the other reason that the HSC is a particularly stressful time is it's really the first time, perhaps in your lives, you've really been under a chronic level of stress related to performance. As you go on with life, this will only be one of many stresses, and you'll actually get better at managing stress, particularly if you go to university where, you know, doing an HSC exams seems like a regular occurrence. But I guess for now it's about learning how to manage it. Now, there's a couple of other things I wanted to tell you about before we move into some tips about how you might manage stress. And that is that we know that when you're under levels of stress, you are likely to increase your goal-directed activity, all right? So you're going to try and focus more on the task at hand. You're likely to it's going to increase your self-efficacy, and it's also going to increase, though, the amount of what's called self-handicapping behaviours. So these are things like procrastination, sabotage and avoidance. So we know that as things get more stressful, you're more inclined to do things that are actually going to make your stress worse. Unfortunately, there are some gender differences here, which again perhaps aren't so surprising. We know that when under pressure, girls tend to become more goal-directed in their activity to try and reduce their stress, while boys do the opposite. They actually increase their self-handicapping behaviours. They tend to use more procrastination and more avoidance in response to stress. So something to be really mindful of. So, is all this stress bad for you? And the answer is yes and no. And that is because stress is simply a state of readiness. So it's actually our body's flight or fight system that's been activated, and it's there to deal with danger. And basically, when we're feeling stressed, it's a source of danger. We feel under threat that we might not do well, that we might fail, and hence this flight or fight system is activated. So it's a very normal, it's a very natural response to be there, but certainly doesn't necessarily feel that great. So those of you who have studied biology might know a little bit more about the flight or fight system. In particular, it's about two branches of our body's autonomic nervous system. The first being the sympathetic nervous system, which is there to release the energy and prepare the body to either flee a situation or to attack a threat. Our body does this by making our heart beat faster. This moves the blood to our arms and legs so that we can run or we can fight. It also causes things like tingling and dizziness. Our breathing rate increases because that provides more oxygen for our body, but this unfortunately can also result in feelings of constriction, choking, smothering and chest pains. The parasympathetic nervous system is the other autonomic nervous system, and its role is to return the body to a relaxed state. So the flight or fight response is basically what those stress feelings are that you feel in your body. They're normal. They actually can't hurt you. So even though you might feel completely out of control, and this is actually even the case when someone experiences a panic attack can't hurt you. It's really just this flight or fight system at its absolute maximum. So we don't have to be particularly worried about it, but we do know that having too much stress for too long, such as chronic stress, such as kind of like what you get going through the HSC, can actually start to lead to what's called learned helplessness. But we actually also know that having too little stress is also unhelpful. So there's some psychologists back in the 1970s who actually came up with this model. It's the Yerkes-Dodson law. I'm sure you've seen it before. It's well known. And what this particular graph shows is that as your level of stress increases, so that's along the x-axis on the bottom, your level of performance initially actually increases. But if your stress or arousal levels get too high, your performance starts to decrease. I hope you can see that clearly. Now this is actually really important, and in fact is really well used by athletes when they're competing, because you can imagine that if you want to run faster, you actually want to use a bit of the flight or fight system, of some of that adrenaline, to actually spur you to move faster. So the key really is about trying to keep your stress levels in the moderate range. So you are actually feeling a bit of stress, you do feel under the pump, which makes you get on with your work, get some study done, but you don't want it to be too stressed out where you're finding it hard to concentrate, and you don't want to be too cruisy or you're just not going to push yourself to do your best. So how do we make sure that stress stays in that moderate level? There's two main things that you can do. You can change what you're doing, all right? So that means doing things like you need to increase your sense of control, all right? So changing the situation somehow to reduce your level of stress. Do things to create a break from the stress, or you can change the way you think. And we're going to talk a little bit about how you can reduce catastrophic thinking and defeatist thinking, because these things really increase stress levels unnecessarily. So a few things I think that you're going to be very familiar with first. I'll move through these fairly quickly, and then we'll get on to some stuff that's hopefully more new for you. You need to keep things balanced, all right? So it's really important when you're under chronic levels of stress that you give yourself a break from that stress. So you do that by planning to have some downtime, some fun time, chilling out, all right? Unfortunately, when we get stressed, usually the first thing that happens is that we stop doing the fun things. We put those aside, we don't have time for those, we just get on and do the task. And that's actually great in a short-term strategy. It's a great way to get through some assignment that's due. The problem with the HSC is we're talking about, 18-month period or so where you're basically under the pump the whole time. And so that's when you have to learn how to manage stress by making sure you have breaks. You force yourself to do some fun things. Now, I'm sure you know what sort of things you can do to chill out. If not, I have some ideas on the screen here, but again, I think you really know what the sort of things that you do that make you feel chilled and make you feel relaxed. You also need to, of course, have a good self-care routine. I'm sure you all know the benefits of exercise. Exercise is particularly good for managing stress and anxiety because it actually burns up some of that extra cortisol that's running around in your body. So when you're feeling really stressed, do some exercise. It can be a run, it can be anything. Ride a bike, go for a walk, go skateboarding, whatever your thing is. Sit down and do some sit-ups, whatever. It's burning up some of that extra energy. Now, it's really important in the HSC that you do maintain your social life and friendships, but keep it sensible, all right? Obviously you can't party as much as you used to. You can do that after the HSC, but it's still important to spend some time with your friends. You need to learn to structure your time. I'm going to talk about that a bit more in a minute. I've already mentioned the importance of getting adequate sleep, and of course, very obviously, it's important that you avoid drugs and alcohol because it's not going to help with your anxiety and depression, and it's not going to help you to study. So in terms of structuring your time, if you're not already, you really need to start thinking about using a diary, okay? So you can plan in when you're going to study, but you also plan in when you're going to have your breaks. And in fact, it's really helpful to plan study first, breaks afterwards, for two reasons. One, the breaks then feel like a reward for spending a couple of hours doing some study. And secondly, you can then enjoy your breaks guilt-free, knowing that you've actually already put in a good amount of effort for the day. All right, so sit down, plan that out, get started in the morning, get your study done, and then give yourself some time for chilling out later in the day. You also need to prioritise your tasks, okay? You are not going to be able to give 100% of your effort to every task. I'm sure you know that already. So you need to kind of work out where you need to spend your time. Obviously, the most time should go with tasks that have the most weight, least amount of time on tasks that have the least amount of weight. And in fact, I think it's quite a common stressor for students to suddenly feel like there's exams coming up in a week and they haven't prepared for them, or there's an assignments or 2 assignments coming up and they're not ready for them. And what I often suggest is that if you can actually sit down and structure your time, it can make a really big difference to reduce your stress levels because it gives you realistic information about how much time you've got left. So you can start backwards. You write in your diary when it's due, then moving backwards through the week, you count up how many study hours do I have, and then you break down what you're going to achieve in each of those study hours. And often when you do that, you realise that you actually have 30 hours or 20 hours in the week, and that's actually going to be enough for you to get done what it is that you need to get done. All right, let's spend a bit of time talking about problem solving. When you're feeling stressed, what you need to do is to try and do something to reduce that stress, all right? If you can't think of what to do, this is a way that you can find some sensible solutions. First, write down what the problem is. Second, write down all the ways that you might be able to solve this problem. And this is really important at this stage, that you put down anything that's going to solve the problem, even some kind of slightly ridiculous responses or some creative solutions, because sometimes it's a combination of solutions in a creative way that actually creates the best solution. Once you've done this, think about the pros and cons for each solution, rank them from worst to best, because sometimes it's actually hard to work out which is the best, so by ranking them worst to best, that helps, and then put in place your solution. So let's have a look at an example. What's the problem? Okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed by the amount of work I have to do. I don't know where to start. So some possible solutions, and these are just a few, could be things like, well, just avoid it and watch TV, this is too hard. You could say, okay, I'm going to work on making colour-coded summary notes of all my class material and my textbook. Even though I haven't got enough time to do this, I'm just going to start and see how far I get. You could say, all right, I'm just going to practice doing exam questions because I just don't think I can keep studying anymore. You might say, I'm going to ask my friends how they're approaching the study. You might say, okay, I'm going to work out what's the most important task and I'm going to prioritise that first. I'm going to forget the rest. And of course, there's a whole heap of other solutions like asking a teacher for help or talking to your parents. I've left them off on this particular example just to save space. You list the pros and cons. So, of course, if you're going to just avoid and watch TV, the pros are things like it's going to be fun, you don't have to deal with the work. The cons are things like you're not going to get your work done and you're going to be more stressed and worried about it in the evening. You could spend more time organising your notes. The pros will be that you'll have beautiful looking notes at the end, but the cons might be that if you haven't got enough time to finish the notes before the exam, you're not going to get time to learn it. And if you're one of those students who gets stuck procrastinating over making things look pretty and neat, then this is a real danger for you. You can see the other pros and cons for the other examples listed there. Rank ordering them, I'm suggesting that the worst would be watching TV, although more fun probably won't help you with the solution, or the problem of getting the work done, and perhaps the best solutions would be things like doing practice exam questions or prioritising the most important learning tasks. And then the idea is you go ahead and you put that into place. So again, it sounds really easy, and I know you already know how to solve problems, but it actually really helps sometimes to grab a piece of pen and paper and to sit down and to think, okay, how are all the different ways that I could solve this? It helps you clear your mind, gives you a sense of control over what feels like a completely uncontrollable situation, and often you'll actually come up with tweaks to what you might have thought about off the top of your head that actually end up working out better. All right, so I really suggest this is an exercise you should give a go. Maybe your teachers can help you walk through an example of this later. The second skill I wanted to talk to you about today is learning how to think about your thoughts. So a lot of feeling stressed, and this in fact applies to anxiety and depression, and in fact applies to all human behaviour. But a lot of what we do and how we feel depends on what we think. And what I mean by think is what we're saying to ourselves about a situation. So for example, if you were feeling like you didn't have enough time to prepare your notes, such as we were talking about in that previous example, if you were thinking to yourself, I don't have enough time, I haven't finished my notes, everyone else is ready, not only are you going to feel really stressed, but you're probably going to deal with this by avoiding studying and by procrastinating and making notes. If you can change your thinking to be a little bit more realistic about the situation so that you're not being so defeatist and you're not catastrophizing about how bad it's going to be, you can often propel yourself into a more relaxed state. So for example, if you were able to think to yourself something like, Okay, making well-organised notes would be nice, but I'm not going to get time to learn it. I'm just going to focus on learning my class notes and then make more notes later if I get time. Or if you think, yes, this is hard, but I've still got time to learn something. Lots of other students are feeling overwhelmed. Well-summarised notes is just one way to learn. Going over the material with the time I've got left is okay too. All right, just an example. Another one, upcoming exam. So very common for students to think, I'm going to fail, I can't do it, this is stupid. Again, that's going to lead you to feel pretty rotten and you're unlikely to study and to do your best. But if you can try and change your thinking to be, again, more realistic, which would be something more like, I don't feel confident, I'm just going to go over the material again, I don't usually fail, so if I keep studying, I'm probably going to do okay. So it's not kind of Pollyanna in that saying it's all going to be fine and I don't have to worry, but it's being realistic and saying, look, I can only do what I can do, I'm going to give it the best shot I can, and in the end, it's probably going to be okay. Alternative thought is just reminding yourself that, yes, this is hard, but I only have a few weeks until it's over, I can get through this. So again, this is something that if we had a bit more time, I'd be actually getting you to practice. But it would be worth you spending a bit of time thinking about what you're saying to yourself, writing them down. Because we do know that when we're stressed or anxious or depressed, we tend to exaggerate how bad we think things are going to be. We catastrophise the consequences. And when I actually did some research with HSC students about the sort of things they were thinking about the HSC, these were the kind of common thoughts that came up. And I assume that they're probably pretty relevant to you as well. This is too hard. I can't do this. I have to remember everything. There's not enough time. If I don't do well, I won't get anywhere. When I get to the exams, my mind will go blank. I must do well in every subject in order to get a good overall mark. I won't be able to get a good job if I don't do well. If I get a bad mark, people will think I'm stupid. Nobody understands what it's like. And I must get into a specific course at a specific university in order to be happy. So if any of those, you relate to those, then what you need to do is try and think about how you can challenge that thinking, because that sort of thinking is defeatist and it's going to make you feel more stressed than you need to. So in order to kind of challenge these thoughts, you can often just ask yourself some questions, by saying, are these thoughts helpful? Are they realistic? Is there another way I can think about this problem? Trying to think realistically is not about positive thinking. It's about saying, what are the facts here? What's realistic in this and what's not? We often talk about trying to look for the evidence against the thoughts. We don't have a lot of time to go over this today, but at least, it gives you some ideas of some questions you can ask yourself. Is this really true? So when you're thinking about that thought, I'm going to fail, or I can't do this, or if I don't get a good mark in every task and subject, I will get a bad overall mark. You can ask yourself, well, is that really true? Is it really true? Do you have to get a good mark in every single assessment, or is there often opportunities to make it up in other places? Is it really true that you're going to fail? And is it really true that if you don't get into the particular course at uni that you want, that your life's going to be in misery? So here's another example, all right, of how you might be able to turn around some unhelpful thoughts. Just say you're feeling unhappy with your major work. You might be thinking things like, my project isn't very good, everyone was going to think mine is dumb. More helpful or more realistic thoughts might be things like, I can still change my project, and some other students aren't happy with their project even though I like it, so maybe mine's okay as well. Or thinking, my parents and teacher will be disappointed with me. My teacher says it's fine. Everyone else has a better idea. It's normal to find major work stressful. Others might like my idea. And this is my favourite subject. I should be enjoying it. A helpful thought might be, in the past, I've often had trouble, but it's worked out in the end. So again, just trying to think about how you can think a little bit more realistically about the situation will help to reduce those stress levels. So I guess these are some ideas about some realistic thoughts that you might think about if you're worrying about not being able to do well in the HSC, or worrying that if you don't do well, you won't get anywhere, or that people will think you're stupid. So I want to remind you, and you know this stuff already, that there are lots of career choices. So universities offer a huge range of subjects and a huge range of courses. And certainly, as I'm sure your teachers have told you, with most universities you can start in one subject, and if you're able to perform well enough, you're often able to transfer into other courses and other degrees and other universities. University study actually isn't for everyone. There are huge dropouts in the first year, and this is where people sometimes make choices about whether uni study is for them. So you have to remember, uni is not the only option. It is a good option, but there are certainly many other options as well. Some people find it really helpful to have a gap year, all right, to have a break and to choose a direction in life rather than starting university before they know where they want to go. TAFE courses are great options as well. Trades, of course, fantastic options. Going into the workforce is good. You can go and earn some money. You can buy a car and buy all the other things that you want. So it's not necessarily a failure not to go to university. You have to remember that people can be successful whatever path they take. And lots of people start in one direction and finish another. And in fact, lots of people who are very successful later in their life didn't do well at school. And sometimes it can be helpful to think about whether you might know some people like that. There might be people in your family or neighbours who will say they didn't do as well as they liked at school, but then once they found their niche, things really improved for them. So I think the important message here is that HSC is not the be-all and end-all. It's tough. You have to get through it, and it's good to try and do your best, but you can do some things to reduce your stress levels, and by doing that, it's ultimately going to improve your performance. So I guess a couple of take-home messages I thought you might take from this presentation. I want to remind you that everyone finds the HSC stressful. Yes, some more than others. But I can tell you, being involved with university students, once they get to uni and they start going through university, they wonder why on earth they were so stressed about the HSC. All right? So it is a discrete period and it's going to end. And I think that's a really helpful thing for you to remember. Remember, there's lots of options post-HSC. You might not even have worked out what it is you want to do just yet, and that's actually fine too. People can be successful even if they didn't do great in the HSC. But of course, you want to strive to do well in the HSC because it's going to just open lots of doors and make things easier. But it's not the end of the world if you don't. Monitor your thinking, because thinking unhelpfully will make things worse for you. Be proactive. Get on with the task. Don't procrastinate. Don't avoid. If something's too tough, work out some solutions and try and solve it. Because the longer you leave it, the worse you feel. And remember to study in chunks, but also to give yourself some breaks. So that was actually the end of the kind of formal presentation. I'm very happy to take some questions and go from there. Again, you can really use that kind of problem-solving situation I was just talking about and write down a whole heap of different ways you could make study fun. Some ideas off the top of my head might be doing something fun and rote learning some stuff at the same time. All right, so it might be skateboarding, dancing, and trying to actually get those English quotes stuck in your head. There's actually really interesting memory tricks that we teach people who have cognitive impairments. So for example, after someone's had a stroke or they're having some kind of cognitive decline, and you might have heard of this before, you get people to kind of imagine a visual scene, like a route that they take, and actually planting the things they need to remember along the route. So if you're a visual person, this sort of study technique might work really well for you. Like where you're walking through the park and you need to remember a particular quote. So you park one quote near the swings, all right? And then you walk along and there's a lovely rose bush and you park another quote that you need to remember, or a maths formula, on the rose bush. So if you're a visual person, you might find a really cool way of actually creating a really visual scene in order to be able to get that stuff in. The other thing that's fun that I can think off the top of my head is that we know that rote learning is kind of some of the stuff that you have to do, right? Some of your subjects are simply about getting the facts and getting them stuck. So you can do rote learning in lots of fun ways. You can dance to a beat and get it stuck. You can, as I said, you can be doing some exercise while getting that stuck. You can sing it to get it stuck. It doesn't really matter what you do, you've just got to get it stuck. So anyway, I hope that's some ideas. The thing about study is that different people study in different ways. So if you're a visual person, as I was saying, you really need to think about doing some visual stuff. So what do they call them? Mind maps, right? Posting quotes. I remember my bedroom had like quotes up on the walls, so that I'd go past places and I'd have visual information to look at. If you're an auditory person, then you might find hearing the information. So I used to also, read my notes out loud. I would write them and then I would read them out loud, and I would try and listen to my voice, because that would try and get the information in. And then there are other people who, it seems, learn best when they're kind of, perhaps, they talk about kinesthetic learning, which is kind of moving and being out and about. So maybe getting physically involved in your study might be useful too. This is a time for you to kind of work out what's best for you. So try a couple of different things, and you'll get a sense of what's the stuff that helps make that information stick. No, not necessarily. So look, for some people, their GPs are going to recommend that they're taking an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety drug. In fact, often antidepressants are also used to manage anxiety. If your GP thinks that's a good option, then that's what you should do. They normally, I would suggest that students take medication before they start their exams, so that they can get through a period of side effects, so get their dosage right. But I guess we're talking about really about 10% of students who ideally would need medication. And you don't necessarily have to have medication in order to get through the HSC. So I think it's about trying to put in place some of these good strategies. If you're looking at medication, I'd suggest maybe trying to get some extra help, all right, from a psychologist or from your school counsellor about other ways to manage stress. But certainly it's not off the cards. Medication certainly has its place, and sometimes this is a good time to be using medication. So it's actually as soon as our body detects threat. Okay, and threat is detected visually, auditorily, sensory, in any particular way. So for example, you step out across the road and a car's coming towards you, you quickly jump back on the curve, your stress system will be activated, all right, because there's an immediate physical threat of danger. Very helpful time for it to be activated. But threat can come in any way. So if you're about to do a class presentation, a class talk, and you're feeling threat, you're feeling like you might not do very well, or people might laugh, or you might not get a good mark, your body will also activate the same flight or fight response, that same system, because it's about threat. So any type of threat activates that system. Yeah, and I think this is the thing that you need to remember, is that study is actually a skill. It's something you actually have to learn how to do. And I think it's unfair to expect yourself that you're able to actually study well, perfectly, without any kind of training. So I think what you need to do is maybe ask your friends, ask your teacher about how they study, try the different ways that they do it, and just try different stuff out, all right? But certainly we know that rote learning is going to be one of the things that's going to be really important, as well as developing your skills by practising doing the task at hand. So for some subjects, you have to just learn the facts, go over and over, like we've talked about already. For others, you need to develop your skills. So for example, writing essays, English or history or whatever the subject might be. And those are going to actually require you to practice writing essays. All right, so that's where setting yourself up in practice exam conditions at home. So getting a copy of some of those past HSC papers, or maybe some questions your teacher can give you, or some of the exams you've already sat. Set a timer for 40 minutes and pretend you're doing it like an exam. Write your response as best you can, and if you want to, you might even be able to ask your teacher to have a look at it for you and to give you some feedback. All right, so it's both trying to rote learn stuff but also practicing the actual skill that you need. I think social media definitely has its place, okay, but it also can be a problem. So the question that was asked was really about stress levels, and I think social media will definitely increase your stress levels if you're using it to procrastinate and it's stopping you from getting on with what it is that you need to do. It can also increase your stress levels if you see something on social media which makes you feel bad about yourself. And I guess this is one of the problems with social media, is that people often post stuff that can make you then reflect on yourself and feel bad. And this may not be the time for doing that. So I think, yes, use social media in a productive way if you're trying to use it somehow to study. But if you're someone, and I think really the HSC is the first time where you have to be in your life really honest with yourself. If you are someone who gets distracted by social media, you need to think about how you're going to manage that. A good solution might be turning it off, right? But I don't mean turn it off all the time. I think use it as a reward. So say I'm going to study for 3 hours, then I'm going to give myself some relaxation time. I'm going to, read a book. I'm going to listen to some music, and I'm going to have some social media time. All right. So you use it as a reward, but then when you're back to study, turn it off. All right. Lots of students find this. They turn their mobile phones off, they put them away, or give them to their parents and say, "Can you hold on to this? Don't give it to me until 4 o'clock this afternoon." If that's what you need to do in order to help yourself, then do that. Take that responsibility. The unhelpful thinking that we were talking about is really important here. All right, so thinking about, why am I so stressed? What am I saying to myself right now? Is this true? And I imagine if you're sitting in a class, you might be thinking things like, "I don't understand this," or I'm never going to learn this. Maybe. So you need to then stop and think to yourself, okay, hold on a minute. How can I get around this? I can ask the teacher later. I can just go over my notes again. And also reminding yourself that everybody has subjects that they're good at and subjects that they're bad at. And if it's one of your, more difficult subjects, your bad subject, then it's going to take more time and effort to get those concepts and to get that information. So I think cut yourself a bit of slack. Now, I advocate for students staying in classrooms. All right? I think removing yourself from the classroom actually becomes problematic, because what you need to do ultimately is you need to learn how to surf through the stress, okay? Ride through those feelings of stress. So if you need to, sit back, take a couple of deep breaths, try and chill yourself out, do some breathing or think of something positive, try and challenge those thoughts, but try and stay present in the class and remind yourself that it's stress, it's not going to hurt you, it's damn uncomfortable, but it will be okay. Yeah, look, in fact, you touch on a really good point. So it actually seems that a lot of the stress that students perceive comes from pressure from family and from teachers and schools. And so you do have to learn how to manage those kind of expectations. Look, I think the best thing to do is actually to have a conversation with your parents, okay? And I'm sure you've tried this, but try and have a conversation again. And if you can take kind of responsibility and say, look, I'm finding it really hard to study this number of hours, okay? But what I'm proposing is this. I find it easier to study in the morning or the evening, but actually I'm not really into evening study. Try and push it earlier in the day. I'm going to work for these amount of hours, then I'm going to actually have a break, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to have some downtime. And put together the plan that you want, and then go to them with that and say, this is the plan that seems to be suiting me. This is what works for me, and I do know that if I try and study too much without any breaks, I'm going to burn out. I'm not going to be able to get through the HSC. All right. So good luck with that. All right. I think you're right. You need to really judge the right level of study for you. Look, yes and no. We certainly know that you need to have some level of stress in order to motivate you to do your best, all right? So if you're feeling really cruisy, you might think about the need to push yourself a little bit more. Think about, what can I do to kind of get some more study, to try and really push myself to do my best. Because, we know that having a bit of that stress, a bit of that threat, does make us perform a little bit better. All right, so I wouldn't be too worried about being a bit chilled. You might find that as time gets closer, you get stressed, and I think maybe that's the key to watch out for, is that you're not so cruisy because you're not doing anything, and in a couple of weeks you're going to completely freak out. So obviously excessive fatigue, but if you're under, in fact, one of the slides, the caveman slide I think I put up in the presentation, talks about some of the physical reactions to ongoing stress. Lots of stress, so lots of fatigue, headaches, stomach aches, constipation, diarrhoea, nausea, dry mouth. So, and they're pretty unpleasant symptoms. So if you're experiencing those symptoms, you know that stress is a little bit too much. You need to give yourself a little bit of time to chill out, go back, restructure your time, work out what the problems are, try and come up with some solutions, and give yourself some regular breaks. But I think, again, remind yourself that it's not going to hurt you. You will get through it. Well, it's an interesting thing because lots of people do worry about their mind going blank. And what I think you can remind yourself of is, how realistic is it that your mind is going to be blank for the full exam period? Actually, quite unlikely. You're going to have a period perhaps where you can't think of what to do. Now, the important thing is that once you get started, you find you kind of get in a groove. And this is really the same with studying. You feel like you can't study, I'm not in the right mood, I can't do this now. Force yourself to do it. Do it for 5 minutes, give yourself a break. Because once you do that, you tend to kind of get in the groove and you get in the mood, and then all the stuff starts to happen. Same with your exam. So if you're sitting there and your mind's going blank, you need to come up with a couple of notes. Okay, what do I know about this subject? Write yourself some notes, all right? Start planning a few things you're going to say and start working on that essay or that exam question. And as you work through it, the information will kind of reappear, it'll be reactivated by your brain, you'll start to come through. And sure, there might be blank periods, but if you just keep pushing through, that information will come. The more you sit there and go, oh my goodness, my mind's going blank, oh my goodness, I can't think of anything, oh my goodness, I'm going to fail, the more your mind is going to be blank. So it's kind of chilling out, getting on with it, and remembering that the information will come. Well, it's a bit hard to know without the specifics, okay? There's most likely stress is going to be a big part of what's going on. Of course, there can be other physical ailments going on, and you should just talk to your parents about that. You should talk to your GP and they can check it out. But I think most likely stress is going to be one of the main factors that's going on for many of you. And it's probably not helpful to get stuck thinking that, oh my goodness, it's because there's actually a real physical cause, when in fact it's probably a lot related to stress or anxiety or depression. But I think if you've got concerns, let someone know, have it checked out. So at least then you can say, okay, there's nothing medically wrong with me, it's just stress. Now I just need to manage my stress. Before we finish up, I just want to say good luck. I do remember what it's like, as do the adults around you. You may think they have forgotten, but they do remember. And all the best with it. Thank you.